The stars above New Colony burned red that night. 17 ships fell through the sky like angry meteors, leaving trails of fire behind them. The colonists looked up from their homes and farms, and fear filled their hearts. Everyone knew what those red ships meant. The had come. Stood at the front of his ship, watching the human world grow larger through the window. His scales were the color of dried blood, and old battle scars covered his face and neck. He was the pack leader of the Red Dragon Pack, one of the most feared hunting clans in all of space. For 60 years, his people and the humans had been enemies. They had fought wars across dozens of worlds. They had burned each other's cities and killed each other's children. But had not come for war tonight. He had come for something far more personal. 3 weeks ago, smugglers had attacked a transport ship near the border. The attack had been quick and brutal. Most of the passengers had died, but the smugglers had taken 3 small prisoners with them, 3 hatchlings who had been traveling with their nursemaid to visit family on a distant world. Those 3 hatchlings belonged to, they were his children. Beside him, his mate pressed her snout against the cold glass of the window. Her scales were darker than his, almost black, and her golden eyes reflected the fires of atmospheric entry. She had not spoken in 3 days. She had not eaten. She had only sharpened her claws and cleaned her weapons and stared at the tracking screen that showed where her bobbies might be. The smuggler ship had crashed on this human colony world. The life signs of 3 small had been detected somewhere in the settlement below. That was all needed to know. "Remember the plan," said to his hunters through the communication system. "We land at the edge of the colony. We find our young. Anyone who stands in our way dies. Anyone who has hurt them dies slowly." 17 voices answered with growls of agreement. The ships landed hard on the soft earth of New, crushing crops and cracking the ground. Was the first one out, his massive body moving with the speed and grace of a predator. His hunters followed him, each one a trained killer, each one ready to tear through an army of humans to save the pack leader's hatchlings. The colonial alarm system started screaming. Lights flashed across the settlement. Humans ran from their homes, some carrying children, some carrying weapons, ignored them all. His eyes were fixed on the tracking device in his hand, following the life signs of his young. Inside the colony, panic spread like fire. The militia commander, a tired woman named Sergeant, tried to organize a defense, but she had only 40 soldiers against 17 warriors. She had seen what could do in battle. 1 warrior was dangerous. 17 was a massacre waiting to happen. "Everyone to the emergency shelters," she shouted through the colony speakers. "This is not a drill. Forces have landed. Everyone to the shelters now." Families grabbed what they could and ran. Children cried. Old people stumbled. The colony had been peaceful for 15 years. Most of the people here had never seen in person. They only knew the stories of claws that could cut through metal, of fire that could melt stone, of warriors who felt no pain and showed no mercy. But not everyone ran. On the eastern edge of the colony, past the main residential area, there was a small farm surrounded by greenhouses. The farm belonged to a man named Park, and he was not running anywhere. He sat in his old rocking chair on his front porch, looking up at the red ships in the sky, and he felt something cold settle in his stomach. He knew why they had come. He had known this moment would arrive eventually. 3 days ago had found 3 small creatures hiding in his greenhouse. They were the size of large cats, covered in dull scales and shaking with fear and hunger. He had never seen anything like them before, but he had recognized suffering when he saw it. He had spent 15 years as a military medic, treating wounded soldiers on battlefields across human space. He knew what trauma looked like. He knew what starvation looked like. So he had done what felt natural. He had fed them. He had warmed them. He had let them sleep in his home, curled up against his chest because they seemed to need the comfort of a heartbeat. His neighbor had told him what they were. Hatchlings, children of humanity's greatest enemy. She had begged him to report them to the authorities, to let the military handle the situation, but had looked at those three small faces, had felt their tiny claws grip his shirt as they slept, and he had said no. "They are just bobbies," he had told. "Whatever their parents are, whatever our peoples have done to each other, these are just scared, hungry bobbies." Now their parents had come, and they had not come with diplomats or translators. They had come with warships and weapons. Stood up slowly from his chair. Inside the house, he could hear the soft sounds of the three hatchlings sleeping. The smallest one, the female he had started calling, always made a little whistling sound when she dreamed. He could hear it now, faint and sweet through the window. He walked inside, closed the door quietly behind him, and sat down in the chair beside the fireplace. The three hatchlings were curled together on a large cushion near the warmth, their scales shining with health now, their bellies full. They had eaten well today. They had played in the greenhouse, chasing insects and climbing the tomato plants. They had laughed, or made the sound that had come to understand as laughter. They trusted him now, they felt safe with him. And he would not let anyone take that safety away, not even their own kind. Outside, the sound of heavy footsteps grew closer. The hunters were coming. 3 days earlier, the morning had been quiet and ordinary. Had woken up before sunrise, as he always did, and walked out to his greenhouses to check on his plants. The tomatoes were coming in well this season. The peppers needed more water. The beans were almost ready to harvest. He had been a farmer for 5 years now, ever since he left the military. After 15 years of blood and death and screaming, he had wanted something peaceful, something that grew instead of died, something that fed people instead of killing them. New Colony had seemed like the perfect place. It was far from the war zones, far from the politics, far from everything that had broken something inside him. Here, he could wake up with the sun, work the earth with his hands, and go to sleep tired in a good way. That morning he had pushed open the door to his largest greenhouse and stopped. Something was wrong. Some of his tomato plants were crushed. There were strange marks on the ground, claw marks, he realized. And there was a sound coming from the far corner, a small, frightened sound. Had moved slowly, carefully. His military training had never fully left him. He picked up a shovel, just in case, and walked toward the sound. What he found made him drop the shovel. 3 small creatures huddled together between the plant beds. They looked like lizards, but not quite. Their scales were a deep red color, though dull and dry in a way that seemed unhealthy. They had long tails and small wings pressed tight against their backs. Their eyes were huge and golden, and they stared at with pure terror. The largest one, still no bigger than a medium-sized cat, pushed itself in front of the other 2. It opened its mouth and made a hissing sound, trying to seem dangerous. But its whole body was shaking and could count its ribs through its scales. "Hey," he said softly, putting his hands up to show he meant no harm. "Hey, it is okay. I am not going to hurt you." The creatures did not understand his words, but something in his tone made the hissing stop. The largest one tilted its head, watching him with those big golden eyes. Sat down on the ground slowly. He remembered his training, how to approach frightened refugees, how to calm traumatized children, how to make yourself seem small and safe. He kept his voice low and gentle. "You look hungry," he said, "and cold. How long have you been out there?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a protein bar. He always carried one with him during morning work. Slowly, he unwrapped it and broke off a small piece. He held it out toward the creatures. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the smallest one, so thin that its heart hurt to look at it, crept forward. It sniffed the food, looked up at, and then snatched the piece and ate it so fast it almost choked. That was the beginning. Within an hour, had brought all 3 creatures into his house. He had wrapped them in warm blankets and placed them near the fireplace. He had cooked fish, fresh from the river behind his farm, and watched them eat until their small bellies were round and full. The smallest one had crawled into his lap after eating. It had pressed its face against his chest, right over his heart, and made a sound like a broken whistle. Then it had fallen asleep. Had sat very still, afraid to move, afraid to disturb the small creature that had chosen to trust him. He sat there for 3 hours until his neighbor came looking for him. Was a scientist who studied alien life forms. She had worked for the military once, studying biology to find weaknesses that could be used in the war. She had quit when she realized that her research was being used to create more effective ways to kill. Now she grew flowers and tried to forget. When she saw what was holding, her face went white. "That is a hatchling," she whispered. "Do you understand what you have done?" He looked down at the sleeping creature. Its small claws were wrapped around his finger like a baby holding onto its parent. "I found them in my greenhouse. They were starving. They are the children of our enemies. Their parents have killed thousands of humans. If anyone finds out you have them here." "Then what?" asked quietly. "What should I do? Throw them outside to die? Call the military so they can lock them in a cage and use them as hostages?" Had no answer. Over the next 3 days, learned how to care for the hatchlings. Helped him despite her fear. She told him what she knew about biology, that they needed warmth, that they needed protein, that young ones bonded through scent and sound and physical closeness. Gave them everything they needed. He modified his heating system to keep the house extra warm. He caught fish every day and cooked it just the way they seemed to like it. And at night, when they cried in their sleep, small sounds of fear and sadness, he held them against his chest and sang old lullabies. The songs were from Korea, from Earth, from a grandmother who had died when was still a boy. Songs about mountains and rivers and the moon. Songs about love and safety and home. The hatchlings did not understand the words, but they understood the feeling. They understood that this strange, soft creature with no scales and no claws was trying to protect them. By the second day, the largest hatchling had stopped trying to bite him. By the third day, all 3 would run to him whenever he entered the room. They would climb up his legs and his chest and settle against him like he was their nest. Started giving them names. The largest one, a male who was brave and protective, he called, which meant spring. The middle one, another male who was curious and always looking up at the sky, he called, which meant sky. And the smallest one, the little female who loved to curl up right over his heart, he called, which meant star. They were not his children. He knew that. He knew their real parents were out there somewhere, probably searching for them. But for these few days in this small house on a quiet farm, he was the only family they had. And he would not fail them. The hunters moved through the colony like shadows made of blood and fire. They did not kill anyone, not yet. Had given strict orders. Find the hatchlings first. Discover what had been done to them. Then decide who needed to die. The humans scattered before them like small animals running from predators. Some tried to fight. A few malicious soldiers fired their weapons at the warriors, but the bullets bounced off scales like rain off stone. Knocked them aside with the back of his hand, not even slowing down. The tracking device led them east, away from the main settlement toward the farmlands. Walked beside her mate, her claws clicking against the ground with every step. She had not spoken since they landed. She did not need to. The fury in her eyes said everything. Their bobbies had been missing for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of not knowing if they were alive or dead. 3 weeks of imagining the worst. Their children cold and alone. Their children in cages. Their children being hurt by the same species that had killed so many over the years. When they finally reached the farmhouse, raised his hand to stop his hunters. The building was small and simple, wood and glass and stone. Smoke rose from a chimney. Warm light glowed from the windows. It looked peaceful, which only made more suspicious. "Surround the structure," he ordered quietly. "I want every exit covered. Nothing gets in or out." His hunters spread out silently, taking positions around the farm. They were trained for war, trained for killing. But tonight their mission was different. Tonight they were here to rescue, not to destroy. Unless destruction became necessary. Approached the front of the house with at his side. Through the window he could see movement inside. A figure. A human. Claws extended automatically, ready to tear through wood and flesh to reach his children. Then he saw them. Through the glass in the warm light of the fire he saw a human male sitting in a chair. The human was not large. He was not armed. He sat very still, and on his chest, wrapped in a soft blanket, 3 small shapes were curled together. Hatchlings, his hatchlings, end. They were sleeping. Their scales, which had been dull and dry when they were taken, now shone with health. Their bodies, which had been thin with hunger, now looked round and fed, and they were pressed against the human's chest as if he were their nest, as if he were safety itself. Made a sound that had never heard from her before. It was not a word. It was something deeper, a mother's shock, a mother's confusion, a mother's desperate hope. The human looked up. He saw them through the window, 2 massive warriors, covered in armor and weapons, staring at him with eyes that could kill. Expected the human to scream, to run, to grab the hatchlings and try to use them as hostages. Instead, the human raised 1 finger to his lips, the universal sign for silence, and he whispered words that's translator picked up clearly. They just fell asleep. Please do not wake them. For a long moment nobody moved, had fought in dozens of battles. He had killed humans with his bare claws. He had burned their cities and watched their soldiers die. But he had never, in all his years of war, seen a human protect young. Pushed forward, she slammed open the door of the farmhouse and rushed inside, her claws ready to strike. The human did not flinch. He did not move. He simply sat there, his hand resting gently on the back of the smallest hatchling, keeping her calm even as her mother stormed toward them. Stirred, her tiny eyes opened, and she saw standing over her. For 1 terrible second, thought his daughter would scream in fear, would see her own mother as a threat because she had been so traumatized by her capture. But did not scream. She made a happy chirping sound, the sound Bobbies made when they felt safe, and then she nuzzled deeper into the human's chest and closed her eyes again. Froze, her raised claws slowly lowered. She stared at her daughter, at the way clung to this strange human, at the obvious comfort and peace in her small body. "What did you do to her?" demanded, her voice cracking. "What did you do to my children?" The human looked up at her. His eyes were calm, tired, and somehow sad. "I found them in my greenhouse 3 days ago. They were cold and hungry, so I fed them and kept them warm. That is all." Entered the house behind his mate. His massive body filled the doorway, blocking out the light from outside. He looked at the human, at the hatchlings, at the simple farmhouse with its fire and blankets and the smell of cooked fish. "You expect me to believe that?" growled. "A human caring for young, we are enemies. We have been killing each other for 60 years. The human shrugged carefully, trying not to disturb the sleeping children. They did not know that. They only knew they were scared and alone. He paused and looked down at who had started to wake up. What kind of person sees a scared child and thinks about politics? Opened his eyes fully. He saw his father, the pack leader, the most powerful warrior he knew, and he made a small sound of recognition. But he did not leave the human's side. Instead, he pressed closer, 1 small claw gripping the human's shirt. "It is okay," the human said softly too, rubbing his back. "It is okay. You are safe. Everyone here wants to protect you." Watched his son relax at the human's touch. He watched stir and yawn and curl up against the human's warm body. He watched sleep peacefully, her small claws wrapped around the human's finger. And slowly, for the first time in 3 weeks, the killing rage in his heart began to fade. The hunters waited outside, their weapons ready, their eyes scanning for threats. They could not understand what was happening inside the farmhouse. They had expected screaming, fighting, blood. Instead, there was only silence and the soft glow of firelight. Inside, knelt on the floor beside the human's chair. She was close enough to kill him with a single strike, but her claws were sheathed now. Her golden eyes were fixed on her children, watching them breathe, watching them sleep, trying to understand how this was possible. "Tell me everything," she said to the human. Her voice was still rough, still dangerous, but the sharp edge of rage had softened into something else, something like desperate need. "Tell me what happened. How did you find them? How did you know what to do?" Spoke quietly, keeping his voice low so the hatchlings would not wake. He told her about the crashed ship in the mountains, the smuggler vessel that had broken apart during entry. He had not known about it at the time. He had only found out later, after told him what the hatchlings were and where they must have come from. "They walked for a long time, I think," said. "Their feet were cut and sore when I found them. The smallest one, I call her, she could barely stand. She had been carried by the others." Made a low sound in her throat. Pride realized. Pride in her children for surviving, for taking care of each other. "They found my greenhouse because it was warm," he continued. "They were hiding between my plants when I found them. The largest one, he tried to protect the others. He stood in front of them and tried to look dangerous." A small smile crossed his face. He was very brave, but I could see he was just as scared as the rest. Stood by the door listening. His arms were crossed over his massive chest and his face showed no expression. But inside, emotions he had not felt in years were stirring. This human had seen his son's bravery. This human had recognized it, valued it, remembered it. "I brought them inside," said. "I did not know what they needed. I did not know anything about your people, but I know what hungry looks like. I know what cold looks like. I know what scared looks like." He looked up at. "I spent 15 years as a medic in the war. I treated soldiers from many species. I learned that suffering is the same everywhere." His breath caught. A human medic. Someone who had probably treated wounds caused by claws. Someone who had seen his own people torn apart by her kind. And yet, when he found children in his home, he had chosen to help them. "Your neighbor," said suddenly. "The female who came to warn us. She said you refused to report them to your military." "Yes," said simply. "Why? They could have been used as hostages. They could have given your people an advantage in negotiations. You could have been rewarded for capturing them." Looked down at, still sleeping peacefully on his chest. Her small body rose and fell with each breath. "Because that is not who I want to be. I have seen too much war. I have seen too many people use children as tools for politics." He met his eyes directly, without fear. "Your children are not tools. They are just children. They deserve to be safe." The room was quiet. Outside, the hunters shifted restlessly, still waiting for orders. The colony was still on lockdown, people hiding in shelters, afraid of what they might do. But in this small farmhouse, something was changing. Appeared in the doorway. She had followed thee at a distance, terrified but unable to stay away. Her scientific mind had been racing since she first saw the hatchlings, and now she stepped forward with a portable scanner in her hand. "I have been monitoring them," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "The hatchlings for the past 3 days." She held up the scanner to show the data. Their stress hormones were extremely high when found them, off the charts, but now, she turned the screen toward, now they are completely normal, healthy, stable. Took the scanner and stared at the readings. She knew what those numbers meant. Hatchlings who experienced severe trauma often took months to recover, even with the best care from their own kind. Some never recovered at all. But these 3, in just 3 days, with a human they had never met before, had healed. "How?" she whispered. Glanced at, he sings to them, old songs from Earth. They do not understand the words, but they respond to his voice, and he holds them constantly. Young need physical closeness to feel safe. He figured that out on his own. Moved closer. He stood over his chair, looking down at his children. Had woken up fully now and was watching his father with wide eyes. But the little hatchling did not reach for. Instead, he pressed closer to his side. It hurt. It hurt more than any wound had ever received in battle. His son, his firstborn, preferred the comfort of a stranger over his own father. But beneath the hurt understood something, was not rejecting him, was simply showing who had been there during the worst days of his young life, who had fed him when he was starving, who had warmed him when he was freezing, who had held him when he was terrified, had done what could not do because had not been there. "You saved them," said finally. The words seemed to hurt him, as if admitting this cost him something deep inside. "You had no reason to help them. You had every reason to hate them, and you saved them anyway." Shook his head slightly. "I did not save them because of what they are. I saved them because of what I am, or what I try to be." He looked up at the massive warrior standing over him. "I do not want to be the kind of person who lets children suffer, no matter whose children they are." Rose from the floor. She walked to her mate's side and pressed her body against his, drawing comfort from his warmth the same way their children drew comfort from the humans. "We came here to kill everyone who had touched them," she said quietly. "We thought they would be hurt, tortured. We thought we would find our bobbies broken and screaming." "I understand," said. "If someone had taken my children, I would have done the same." For a long moment no one spoke, then made a small sound in her sleep, a happy chirping noise, the same sound she had made when she first saw her mother, and slowly began to cry. The hunters stood in confused silence as their pack leader walked out of the farmhouse. His face was different now. The killing rage was gone. In its place was something they had never seen before, something that looked almost like peace. "Stand down," ordered. "There is no enemy here." The hunters looked at each other. They had come for blood, for revenge, for justice. They had expected to burn this colony to the ground, but their leader was telling them to stop, and a pack leader's word was law. One by one, they sheathed their claws and lowered their weapons. Inside the farmhouse, something important was happening, had finally held her children again. The hatchlings had woken up and climbed into their mother's arms, chirping and crying and pressing their small faces against her scales. But even as they reunited with her, they kept looking back at. They kept reaching for him with their small claws. They did not want to choose. They loved their mother, but they also loved the human who had saved them. In their young minds, both were family now. Stood up from his chair slowly, his body stiff from sitting so long. He walked to the window and looked out at the hunters surrounding his farm. 17 warriors, each one capable of killing him in seconds, and yet he was not afraid. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Came back inside. The pack leader had to duck low to fit through the human doorway, and even then his horns scraped against the wood. He stood in the center of the small room, filling it with his presence. "In my culture," said, "there is no greater honor than protecting another's young. When someone saves a child that is not their own, they earn a debt that can never be fully repaid." He looked at with eyes that had seen 100 battles. "You have earned such a debt from the Red Dragon Pack." Shook his head. "I do not want a debt. I do not want rewards or honors. I just did what was right." "That does not matter." Moved closer until he stood directly in front of the human. This close, the size difference was extreme, was nearly 3 meters tall, covered in scales and muscle and scars. Barely reached his chest, but the human did not step back. Slowly, with great dignity, knelt. He lowered his massive body until his head was below. And then he did something that made every hunter outside gasp in shock. He tilted his head back and exposed his throat. In culture, this was the ultimate gesture of submission and respect. A warrior only offered his throat to someone he considered worthy of absolute trust. For a pack leader to do it, especially to an alien, especially to an enemy species, it was unheard of. "The Red Dragon Pack owes you a blood debt," said formally. "Our claws are your claws. Our fire is your fire. From this day forward, you are under our protection. Any enemy of yours is an enemy of ours. Any friend of yours is a friend of ours. This debt will pass from generation to generation until the stars themselves burn out. Did not know what to say. He looked at who nodded solemnly. He looked at the hatchlings who were watching with wide eyes. Then he looked back at. I do not need protection, he said quietly. I am just a farmer. Rose to his feet. For the first time, something like a smile crossed his face. You are much more than that, and we will remember. The news of what happened on news spread quickly through both human and space. At first, no one believed it. The Red Dragon Pack, the most feared hunting clan in the Confederacy, had descended on a human colony and left without spilling a single drop of blood. It seemed impossible. But the story was true, and it began to change things. Diplomats who had failed for 60 years to make peace suddenly found new hope. If a simple farmer and a pack leader could find understanding, perhaps their governments could too. Negotiations began again. This time, they actually went somewhere. Did not become famous. He refused all interviews, all honors, all political positions. He wanted only one thing, permission to stay in contact with the hatchlings as they grew. Granted this request without hesitation. Years passed. The hatchlings grew into strong young, became a warrior like his father, though he always preferred protecting to fighting. Became a pilot who mapped new star systems and gave them Korean names that had taught him. And the smallest one, who had once curled up over a human's heart, became the first ambassador to the Human Federation. When was asked why she chose this path, she always gave the same answer. She would touch the small scar on her scales, a mark from the crash that had changed everything, and smile. I learned something when I was very young, she would say. I learned that kindness does not see species. It does not see politics or history or war. It only sees someone who needs help and someone who can give it. She would pause, her golden eyes soft with memory. A human taught me that, a farmer with gentle hands and a warm heart. He did not care that I was. He only cared that I was cold and hungry and scared. Every year on the anniversary of her rescue, returned to new. She was not alone, and always came too. They would land their ships in the same field where their father's hunters had once stood ready for war. And then they would walk to a small farmhouse, where an aging human man waited on his porch with a warm fire burning inside. They would curl up around him like they had when they were hatchlings, 3 grown warriors, each one powerful enough to destroy cities, pressed gently against a frail human body, and would hold them just like he had when they were small and scared and alone. Sing for us, would whisper, just like she always had. And would sing old songs from Earth, from Korea, from a grandmother who had died long ago. Songs about mountains and rivers and the moon. Songs about love that crossed all boundaries, even the boundaries between stars. Outside, the night sky burned with the light of 2 peoples who had once been enemies and were now, slowly, becoming friends. And it had all started here, in this small farmhouse, with a man who simply could not let children suffer. No matter whose children they were.